Hey guys, if you're just viewing this video, stop. This is part 2. Part 1 can be seen on Slahser's YouTube page, which is linked below. If you have seen part 1 already, then welcome back and enjoy part 2.
Okay, 8-7 off we get to play. In the blind. Okay. Not much we're going to be able to do here either. It's kind of a poor flop for both ranges really. But in position with his overpairs. So here's how it works out: is in position has a lot more overpairs than us, but we have more 9x. The problem is that I think this is a board that people bluff at, or have been bluffing at a lot over the last few years, so you get less respect on it. That's not to say that I wouldn't bluff some of the time here, but the hands I would choose to bluff would have to have both backdoor straight and backdoor flushes.
Okay. Yeah. I started studying with Pio Solver.
Okay.
Some weeks ago, and yeah, it also says that with these flops you want to have like two clubs.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you study with Pio Solver at all, what you realize is that like backdoor equity or any added equity that you can get makes a big difference to the hands that it'll choose to play and those that it'll choose to fold. So I think 8-7 off here would just be a straight up check fold. He checks. The queen is better for his range really, so we didn't pick up any added equity, so I think just carry on with the check fold line.
Yeah. If we had, let's say we had 8-7 of clubs here.
Yeah. And
he bets the flop, and we decide to check raise.
Okay.
Do we then only continue on like when we have a straight chance or a flush chance, or can we also, like if the turn is maybe a 4 of spades or something, can we also just bet maybe half pot just to maybe force out a sticky ace high or something like that?
I think you kind of want to go. So my intention here would probably be to check raise pretty small. And then, yeah, I wouldn't be barreling pretty much any Broadway, I'd imagine, apart from the 10 and the jack of clubs or something. Or perhaps, yeah, a 10 or a jack, which gives us a gut shot. I might barrel on. And yeah, I think you can. It would definitely be a spot to look at in Pio, like how often you carry on. Whether you only carry on when you pick up added equity, or whether you carry on barreling. I feel like if you check raise small, you need to be barreling at a higher rate because your opponent is going to call more often. So I'd probably check ace, king, queen, 9. I would definitely be betting a 2, anything below a 9, and a 10 or a jack. And I would be betting it for like 2/3 pot. So say he bet this sizing, I'd probably only be check raising to like 275 or something like that.
Yeah. Because
just even with a small check raise, it puts our opponent in difficult positions if you're balancing your range correctly. So if you're not choosing to bluff too much, if you're choosing to bluff too much, then it's giving him just the right price to call with a lot of stuff. But if you're choosing to keep your check raise range relatively small, just not going crazy on this board, then the small bet does deny him equity and also will allow you to bet bigger on the turn. And it also allows you to check raise all your 9s pretty well as well. So that's how I would be playing this hand. But yeah, the 7-8 offsuit is definitely going to be a fold. Okay, ace king. We open. So this board is slightly different in that so the first monotone board we had, it was kind of queen 10-4 or something. which hits our opponent's range slightly better than it hits ours, and our opponent has position. This range with the ace high and the 6-7 kind of hits our range better than our opponent's. Having said that, our check here is going to be pretty high. We're still going to have to check quite a high proportion of the time, but ace king is definitely one of those hands that can go in the bet. It could also go in a check raise. It could go in a check raise because our opponent can bet stuff like ace jack here, ace queen, ace 10, and we do pretty well check raising against those because we can also be check raising stuff like king 10 with the king of diamonds, things like that. And the other reason why I prefer this board for betting or check raising is because the ace of diamonds is out, and that reduces the amount of actual flushes that our opponent has by a lot, because people calling an early position bet in mid position, the majority of their flush hands when it becomes like this is going to be ace X, and because the ace isn't there, it knocks out about half their flushes that they can possibly have. So I kind of like a check raise on this board, but I can also see us betting. I think you can go for. I think you probably want to go like half pot just to get value, because our opponent does have so many hands that he wants to actually continue with.
Check call.
Check call I don't like quite as much, because you're basically allowing your opponent free equity with all his with his single diamonds. You could go check call, check raise turn, but I still prefer just a check raise, especially given how the stack sizes are, because what we get to do is check raise, flop, shove, turn, and yeah, that puts our opponent's entire stack at risk, and we are going to get called by worse, so I kind of like that option best. Otherwise, I think it's half to 2/3 pot size bet on this flop, just to get value, and that kind of play, the half to 2/3, is just based on the tournament that we're in and our opponent's range, given that he should have a lot of ace X in this situation, even though there's two out there. And he'll also, we don't want to be giving our opponent cheap cards when he can have a ton of, pocket tens with the 10 of diamonds, that kind of stuff. So we go for the, well, first for our opponent's sizing, which I think our opponent's sizing is pretty good. When it's a dynamic board like this, it's good for the in-position player to be betting pretty small, because it puts us in tough situations when we just have, like, we're going to have to check fold our king queen off with no diamond here. So he gets to make it small. The same goes for the in-position player or the out-of-position player when a card comes that really changes the board. So say another diamond came here again, you want to be using small sizing again. And if you play around with Pio, you'll find that out, that when the dynamics of the board changes pretty drastically from one card to the next, say like a 4 straight fills, or something like that, usually the betting that goes on after that card is going to be a pretty small sizing. Just on another note. Okay, so we check call. Against this sizing, I think you definitely want to check raise, because we've basically just let our opponent dictate how cheaply he gets to see the turn card for by check calling. And if we're not check raising a hand like ace king here, what are we check raising? Our value range here is just going to be super thin.
So a more general question, do we need to have a check raise range out of position?
I think you do want to have a check raise range out of position, yeah.
Pretty much always on pretty much all boards. So
I don't know that it has to be always on all boards.
Mostly we want to check raise.
But I think we definitely want to check raise range in these kind of spots, because we have to be doing so much checking pretty often these days. Back in the day, it was like you raised, you c-bet like 80% plus because it worked so well. But these days, it doesn't work so well. And because of that, because people are playing wiser in position, we have to develop pretty good checking ranges. And what actually happens if you just become one of those people who just check calls out of position is that our opponents are allowed to start calling us more pre-flop because they get to realize more equity post-flop. And the reason why they get to realize more equity post-flop is one of the things you're doing when you're check raising here is you're denying your opponent equity. Like a hand like Queen Jack here has equity against Ace King. Now a check raise, well, sure, we'd actually prefer to keep him barreling, but we do actually deny equity when we check raise here. But if he knows that you're a guy who's just going to check call, you'll get kind of slaughtered by someone who knows that they get to play more hands against you because they're going to realize more equity post flop. And if you do just become one of those people who check calls, like with the stack sizes as they are, Ace King is pretty easy to play here and get pretty decent value out of. But when we choose to check call here, turns and rivers become very tricky for us. Because what happens when we check call here and the turn is like the 5 of clubs, our opponent bets again when we check, and now we're in a spot where we don't really want to check shove because we're probably only getting called by better. We could be completely dead here in the first place, which is a possibility on the flop as well, but is less likely. And also, you know, we can't fold yet, but we're likely to face a shove on the turn. So check raising here kind of keeps the hand simpler, but we also still get tons of value. And we can also, like, especially in an $11 zoom, we can get really decent value by check raising here. Because our opponent will probably call us too much with like 1 card diamonds. They'll probably, you know, bet call here with Ace 10 with a 10 of diamonds and not fold at all. Which is probably the correct play anyway, but you know, we definitely want to get that as opposed to check calling and then having our opponent check back like Ace 5 on the turn. So yeah, I think there's a lot more merit to check raising here. And can you kind of see that now?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Right, let's see what happens. So the 9 comes, and that's, you know, our opponent can definitely have Ace 9. He can have, I don't think he has pocket 9s ever. I doubt he has like 7-9 suited. So it changes it a bit, but not a lot. I think we probably just go for a check call again. I don't like check raising now because of the reasons that I gave earlier. However, it's not the worst play in the world to check shove here. But at this stage, you might get some hero folds out of some ace-x, out of the lower ace-x. When the 5 comes, yeah, we're just going to be... Now it kind of gets iffy. Especially if we know our opponent can shove 2 pair for value here, which I think most people will do given how the hand played out. And people are going to be calling ace-x suited here a decent amount of the time. Our opponent can have... He can have the flush, he can have 6s, he can have 7s. Can't really have 9s or 5s because I think he checks them back on the flop. But there's like a lot of stuff that we lose to now when he shoves. But we're still like too high up in our range probably to fold if we decide to play it like this. And he decides to check, and he does have the king 10 with the king of diamonds.
I feel like I'm maybe I want to make a case that it's at least better to, at least it gets a bit better to like go passive check call mode when he doesn't jam King of Diamonds here, because I think he should have jammed the King of Diamonds here.
I don't think he should have jammed the King of Diamonds, because what the King of Diamonds does is it blocks one of the main hands that, or main parts of your range that you will check fold on this river, which is King X with a diamond, or King X with the King of Diamonds, because you could certainly play King X with the King of Diamonds in this way, especially given his flop sizing. And when he blocks that, that's blocking like a good percentage of the hands that he actually wants you to fold when he's bluffing. And just in general, as like a rule of thumb, the hands that you want to be bluffing with when you go 3 barrels are usually not going to be flushes. So if you pick up a flush draw on the flop, it's usually not good to triple barrel a flush draw when you miss. And the reason being the same as this, that you block a lot of the proportion of your opponent's range that you actually want to fold on the river when you're bluffing. So I kind of disagree. I think it's a good check behind. Also, if he's bluffing the King 10, he actually has like a minuscule bit of showdown value with a King 10 here. Because you could be opening like Queen Jack with the Queen of Diamonds here, Queen Jack with the Jack of Diamonds here. So there are like a very few hands that he can actually win with at showdown, or win against at showdown. So I think choosing the King 10 here is not the best bluff for a couple of reasons there.
Okay.
Okay. Have I changed your mind there, or do you still think it's
It's just, I feel like most people were like, if I had the King of Diamonds here, I would bet flop and turn, and then maybe like do a bluff shove on the river, just because I blocked the nut flush draw. Like it makes it more likely that he maybe has an ace, and then like I'm blocking his flushes that he's just calling with.
I think I would. I probably differ from how I would play the flop, and perhaps the turn. I would definitely be checking back either the flop or the turn. I may choose to bet the flop in the hope that our opponent just, we fold out King Jack, King Queen, where he has not much. However, I kind of like a check back with the King 10 with the King of Diamonds here, because one, it's deceptive. Two, we actually, we're not doing that badly versus our opponent's range if he's going to be checking 100% here. And three, it keeps the pot small for bluffing on later streets if I choose to bluff. And four, if we get check raised here, I'm hating life, because we basically have a flush draw and that's it. Our opponent isn't going to check raise here with the Queen high flush, a hand like Queen Jack with a Queen of Diamonds. So I really hate life when we get check raised, and it just gives us so many more opportunities that I prefer to check behind with this kind of hand and perhaps bluff something else.
I think I will later. I will try to put this hand into Pio, and I'm curious to see how Pio wants to play this.
One thing that I've realized with Pio is that quite often, in position does a lot more calling and checking and just trying to realize equity than bluffing. Now, this might be completely different in this spot because
out of position or in position does a lot more checking and calling.
In position.
Okay.
Because in position gets to decide the final action, and also gets to decide the final action on the next street as well. So, like, Pio likes the fact that it has more information on the turn, because you get another card, plus you get your opponent's action before you.
So you raise less when you're in position.
I think you do less raising. It doesn't mean that you don't raise, but I think you do less raising, especially with hands that have showdown value. But yeah, I mean, it would be pretty interesting to stick this hand into Pio and see what it comes out with. Okay, we'll do a couple more hands and then we'll call it a session for this video. Okay, Jack 9 suited. This is a hand that I can go either way with. I can 3-bet, I can call. In this spot, I have no preference really. You go for 3-bet. I think the sizing is fine. Get 2 calls. Interesting with an overcall behind. If we had any backdoor equity here, apart from the very terrible backdoor straight that we could have, I think I would probably c-bet here.
Yeah.
Because this board hits us pretty hard, but we're not going to be able to bet this c-bet this board 100% with a cold call behind, because he has a fairly high proportion of kings. So I'd want some equity to be barreling on this board to c-bet. And yeah, I think as played, I think we should probably just check and give up. We do pick up the gut shot, but there is a flush draw out there now as well. So yeah, I'm pretty happy just to give up on this. I kind of want to see what these guys have now. 8 and ace queen. So we probably could have got them to fold at some point in the hand, but it might have got expensive. And yeah, this is only like a small portion of their range that they can have.
Yeah.
Okay, 5-6 suited. I'm happy to limp, happy to raise. It's nice to raise here when you have more information about people. I feel like just calling here and playing a small pot with a very good holding in position is the better play, which you do. Pick up a gut shot. It's not that exciting 4-way unless we hit. Versus a small bet, I'm going to continue. I would be bluffing if it checked to me. I would probably go for a bigger sizing than this player does. Yeah, I'd definitely be going for a bit of a bigger sizing, and then I might even, depending on how many players, checking back the turn is better against more players. So he checks to us and we decide to bet. I think we should probably be just checking behind here. What was your reasoning for a bet here?
Just his bet size on the flop was just so small, so I felt like if he had a queen, he would bet probably larger.
Okay. So what do you think he's betting for that size?
Like he could have so many like random, I don't know, ace 10, like just a random hand. Maybe I guess he could also have 8s, 9s, 10s that he wants to protect a bit. I just felt I see how like check would also be fine here, but I just wanted to bet like 1/3 to just try to deny as much, because my hand is very vulnerable if it is the hand by now, and if it's not, it just gives me a pretty cheap showdown at the river, because he will often just call and then check the river.
Yeah, so I think like the reasons, you basically want to have both reasons to be true to be able to bet that I've been talking about. So denying equity and also getting value. And this hand does fall into one of the categories. So it does deny equity, but it doesn't fall into the second category.
Yeah, I'm not really getting value.
Because, well, like you said yourself, there's a fair few hands that he bets small here that we're really doing terribly against, like 7x, and any 8s, 9s, 10s that he managed to limp along pre-flop, which is perfectly viable in this kind of tournament. I have seen people play Queen X this way before as well, so I just think if we're going to have a check back range on the turn here, 5x is definitely going to be in it, based on the fact that we can't get any value. And the hands that we're denying equity to. There's only one card left, so they're not doing amazingly against us. And yeah, I think just kind of taking our equity in position again is a much better play than one, trying to build a pot with a hand that doesn't get much value out of anything, and two, putting ourselves in a situation where we do have a fair amount of equity even against his better hands here. Yeah. You know, if he has 10s, 9s, we still have a fair amount of equity against them. But we are building a pot in a bad situation. And also, if we get check raised here, we're in a pretty awful situation again. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a check here is probably, yeah.
I think it's a better play in this spot. He just folds. Okay, we'll do one more hand and then we'll call it a day for this one.
All right.
Ace-4 suited, 3x, and we call. Fine with that. In the blinds, we get a small bet size here, which I feel like the bet sizing on this kind of flop should be bigger, even against the big blind range.
Yeah.
And you know, when people make this bet sizing, they should be making this bet sizing because they're doing this with a big portion of their range, because they expect to get a lot of folds. This isn't the kind of flop that I think they're going to get a huge amount of folds on. It's just too connected, with too many backdoors, too many straight up flush draws, pairs for the big blind. So I don't quite agree with his bet sizing. And I think it's a bet sizing where we should be doing a fair amount of check raising against him, and I think this hand falls into one of those check raise type hands. We have good backdoor equity. We have the nut flush draw plus a wheel draw as backdoors, and we also get to bluff clubs if they come, if we check raise. So yeah, I would be choosing this one to check raise. Whereas I would be choosing a hand like Ace-4 of clubs, I would be choosing to check call that, which I think is probably different to how a lot of people play, at the lower stakes anyway.
So you wouldn't be raising your club flush draws here?
No, because I have more opportunities later in the hand to raise with the clubs. Like if the 6 of spades comes off or something like that, 6 or the 7 of spades comes off, I can choose to check raise. And even if I don't get to check raise, you know, I get to see all 3 streets, which means that I realize my equity fully. Whereas a hand like Ace-4 of hearts, it's more difficult to realize my full equity because, well, sometimes my ace high is good in the first place, but I'm not going to see the river, because if we check call, you know, the jack of spades comes off and he barrels again, we just have to fold. So I think check raise, and if you are going to have a check raise range on this board, like, you have to have some hands that you're going to check raise, and I think this is a good one that, you know, if we check raise and we get shoved on, we don't really care. If we check raise Ace-4 of clubs and get shoved on, we're calling, and again we're, you know, probably flipping or slightly worse than flipping for our entire tournament, pretty much, in this spot. And Ace-4, the other reason why it's a good check raise is we have a lot of cards that we can either choose to barrel on, or we could choose to check shove on. You know, if a 3 of hearts came or something like that, we could choose to check shove on that. And even if we don't get, you know, even if he checks behind, we still have a ton of cards on the river that actually fill us up. So we can get value that way. I'm not saying you have to check shove, and I'm just saying it gives you more options than if you had like a hand like Ace-4 of spades here or something like that. Okay, so what do? We check call, which I think is okay.
Yeah, my idea was just...
It's not like, I don't think it's quite the optimal play in this spot versus his bet sizing, but it's not bad.
Yeah, I like check raising with hands like this. Your suggestion, I like that. My idea was just, if he had bet larger, I would probably just have folded, but that sizing just seemed like I could probably just float him. And
you definitely have the equity to float him here with that hand. You would against a bigger bet size as well, as long as he's not the type of player who's just going to bet when he has it and check when he doesn't. which I'd say is not the case with his bet sizing, because those players tend to just bet bigger when they have it and check when they don't. The 3 of clubs is actually an interesting card for us. It's actually a card where I could see us donking small. The reason being that, like I was saying before, when board texture changes pretty dramatically from one card to the next, these small bets put a lot of pressure on our opponent. Even though it'll be a small bet, the fear that the river might be a big bet is actually pretty good. Which is one way to play like a made flush here if you check called. Like if I had the ace-4 of clubs, this is a play that I might make, is lead small here, because it's highly likely that my opponent, when the board texture changes like this, is just going to check behind, especially if he has a hand like, ace-king off that he decided to c-bet here.
He might even, if he has kings, he might even check behind on it.
Yeah, I mean, players can check behind anything on when the flush comes in.
So when you say lead small, is that like betting 210 here or something?
Yeah, I could bet 210 with the idea of following it up pretty often. I don't think you always have to follow it up, but it's just another way that we could play it. And like most of these hands, every situation you can play lots of hands in different ways, so it's just like suggestions of how you could play the hand as part of a different range. So if we're going to have a bluff here that doesn't have a club, this is a pretty good hand to do it, because we still have equity. A hand like 5-6 of hearts would be good as well, 4-5 of hearts, if we decided to check call those, which we could, although they would definitely make better check raises. So I kind of like playing like that, just leading small, because what happens when we don't lead small is our opponent can check behind, which we have our equity, but he can also deny us our equity on the river, because we're going to have to check the river as well, or he just bets the turn and we have to fold if he makes it a sizing that's acceptable. He checks back and you lead. I think it's okay given how the hand played out. It's perfectly acceptable to lead here, and we would want to be leading like our 9x here for sure, maybe not 8x, but definitely our 9x. We can definitely have flushes, so if we want to have some bluffs, that's okay to have. The only problem is what are we trying to get to fold out, and it's the bigger ace-x type stuff, because that's the only stuff that beats us. We beat his 10 jacks, his 10 queens, his king queens. We beat all that stuff, which is what you got to be careful of when you're bluffing, and choosing the hands that you choose to bluff with. Is that you want to be folding out hands that are better than you, and the only hands that he has that are better than us is ace 10 plus. Which he will have at a fairly high rate, but also by leading we deny our opponent the opportunity to bluff us, which is another reason why it's okay to lead here, I think. So overall I probably would have played the flop differently, maybe not have bet the river, but I think it's perfectly fine in this situation. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. This has been Owen Shields from RunAtOnce.com, and it has been...
This has been Hackpot, aka Slahser, known in the DOTA world. Trying to get much better at poker if possible.
Good, you're getting there. You're not too bad already, so keep trying. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.